fans of the Raw Prospect Podcast and Longhorn fans everywhere, welcome into episode 48 of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports here on Monday night, February 5th, week of Super Bowl 58. It's a huge week. We're going to have a bunch of Super Bowl content later on this week, but we're here to talk about Texas. Episode 48. Welcome in. If you're tuning in live, feel free to leave your comments, your opinions, your questions in the chat. We will answer them if you put them in the chat live on the show. Welcome in. Monday, February 5th. Hopefully everyone had a fantastic weekend, coming off a big weekend in college basketball, especially for those Texas Longhorns. The men's team was able to grab a huge road win on the road in Fort Worth at a top 25 TCU team, coming off back-to-back losses. Kind of a disappointing loss against Houston last week. They had a chance to win that game, didn't finish. They bounce back. They get the win at TCU. And the women's team, big-time win at home against number 2 K-State. They've moved up all the way to number 6 in the women's rankings. And the big thing about that is they've been missing their best player, Rory Harmon, now for a while. She's out for the season with a torn ACL, and so it's just hard to fathom what the actual potential of the women's team might be if they had one of the best players in the country healthy. But they're still sitting at 21-3, sitting pretty at number 6 in the country. So all is well on the Texas basketball front. We're going to get to a state of the program discussion here in a little bit. But the big segment tonight is going to be, and I've been waiting to do this for a while, our 2024 Texas signing class grades as we put a nice bow tie on the 2024 recruiting cycle with the final national signing day for the 24 cycle coming up here on Wednesday. It's not going to be a very active signing day for the Longhorns. They pretty much did all their work in the early signing period back in December. We all remember that. But Sark will have a press conference. I think it'll be his first time speaking to the media since the end of the season, and he'll get to talk about again some of the guys that Texas was able to sign in this class, along with some of the transfers that we haven't, heard him talk about yet, along with some of the coaching hires that he's made. We'll get to see about that as well. So while there won't be many guys committing or signing with Texas, I don't think, unless a major surprise happens, we will get to hear the head coach of the football team talk about the state of the program. With all that being said, though, welcome to my co-host and fellow Longhorn fan, a busy man himself, Mr. Emmy Nixon. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. I've got completely unrelated, but I've got a big day tomorrow. I'm actually going to be caddying in the Mexico Open qualifier, which is like a huge PJ Tour sanctioned event. So I'm super excited for that. Going to be up early for that. And then over the weekend, sat down and watched some college basketball Saturday. That was great. I mean, those 4 games that we talked about on the show lived up to the hype, some more than others, but some really good basketball. And then, of course, for me in particular, the huge F1 news. Lewis Hamilton moving to Ferrari.
We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that for sure.
We'll be hitting on that in the future in a possible, maybe F1 episode, maybe before the season starts. But yeah, a lot of crazy stuff over the weekend.
Yeah. We're going to put out details on our social media feed likely tomorrow on what our Super Bowl episode is going to look like. We're going to talk about that after we record tonight. It's likely going to include a lot of, obviously, analysis on the game, the matchups. We're going to break down the game in entirety, but we're also going to talk about probably some prize pick stuff where we're going to talk about some fun prop bets, if I had to guess, like we did last year. And we're going to keep our little contest going. We're going to pick the game. Obviously, I will not be picking against Patrick Mahomes again. But
no, I won't either.
I don't think even if we think the 49ers might have a chance to win, we're not going to be picking against the Kansas City Chiefs no longer after what happened in that Ravens game. Anywho, we've got to get to what we want to talk about tonight. Do you want to start with this Texas basketball stuff, or do you want to get into this recruiting stuff?
Um, let's talk some Texas basketball real quick. I think over the weekend that win against TCU, I thought they showed a lot of grit, and I think that's a game where you gotta you gotta tip your cap to Tyrell Terry a little bit. He really rallied them together. They got down early. TCU came out hot. They hit, I think, 3 threes right out of the gates. Went up 7-zip, 10-2, or something like that. And from there, it was kind of an uphill battle, and they slowly worked their way back into it. It was just a grind the whole way through. And then Max Asmus got hot late, of course, which just really brought them over the edge. What were your takeaways on that game in particular?
First of all, it's a huge win. I believe it's Texas's fourth quad one victory. And believe it or not, Texas now sits at 15-7 overall, which isn't bad. They're 3-2 in this stretch of 6 consecutive ranked games, which 2 weeks ago, if you would have told me that, I would have said, sign me up for that.
Yeah.
And they're now 4-5 in conference play. But the interesting part about it with this Texas team is 3 of those 4 wins have actually come on the road. And in a conference where it's so hard to win at home, much less on the road, to have 3 home losses in a place where, like the Moody Center, where I think it's one of the better home court advantages in college basketball already, given the newness of the arena, the noise in there, the student section. But to have 3 home losses and 3 road wins in conference, to sit at 4-5 in conference play, I don't know. It's just kind of weird how it's worked out so far. But right now they're actually sitting in a pretty good spot. Like 10 or 11 teams, I believe, are within 2 games of each other in the Big 12 standings right now. To be in this spot halfway through the season, or halfway through the conference play season, is, I think, an accomplishment that this Texas basketball team should be proud of. Now, they can't get complacent, obviously, but I think this is, if you asked Rodney Terry 3 weeks ago, you'd be 4-5 in conference play. You'd have 3 home conference losses. I don't think he'd like that. But you'd be 4-5 in conference play. You'd have a road win at Oklahoma. You'd have a road win at a ranked TCU. You have a home win against a top 15-ish Baylor team. I think he would have taken that. So I don't know. That's my big takeaways. I think Texas right now, based on their resume, even as bad as it kind of was in non-con, as they didn't really have a marquee victory, they sit in a pretty good spot right now. In most bracketologies, they're firmly off the bubble as of right now. Obviously, they need to keep winning at this kind of pace. You can't go, 1 or 2 wins and then 2 losses like they've done. You need to develop more consistency. But right now, I saw one bracketology earlier from the Field of 68, which is a network I really respect. They have Texas now as a 7 seed. And so I think the opportunity now presents itself for Texas to, if they can win some of these games, get to 500 in conference play, or maybe even finish above 500 somehow, they could get themselves and work themselves up to like a 5 or a 6 seed line, which would be pretty incredible considering the circumstances of this season. Though that's my big picture takeaway. I think where Texas sits right now, halfway through conference play, a lot of work left to be done, but it's where they sit right now, based on their schedule, is something to be proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at where it was at pre this stretch, I just said, I think they were sitting 1-2, 1-3 in conference play.
Yes.
At that point, it was not looking good at all. Coming off that loss to
UCF.
Cincinnati and UCF, where they had leads. I think this team is really starting to find itself. For one, the size mismatches in the backcourt, they're not as noticeable because it feels like the team is more cohesive and more locked in into their defensive coverages and their rotations and everything like that. The players have settled into their roles a little bit more. I like the move to bring in what's his name? They brought in that transfer guard into the starting lineup.
Kendall Weaver.
Kendall Weaver, yeah, exactly. The energy that he brings, I think, it brings the energy that we were expecting Brock Cunningham to bring at the start of the year. And it's not that Brock Cunningham is bad or anything, but Kendall Weaver is bringing that type of energy, and that's what is needed right now.
Something I think is important, or is going to be important for Texas, and you're absolutely right. Over the next stretch of games, the next 9 games in conference to finish out the regular season, right now sitting at 15-7, you look at the breakdown of the next 9 games. Of course, it's not going to get any easier, but the point I'm trying to make is 5 of the next 9 games you get at the Moody Center. 4 away from home, where you've actually been really good, or a lot better than you've been at home for whatever reasons. The problem is 3 of those 4 away games are at Houston, at Kansas, and at Baylor. So I'm not saying that Texas, if they play the underrated brand of basketball that they're playing for most of the last 2 weeks, I'm not saying that they couldn't go beat Baylor on the road or they couldn't go beat Houston on the road. But you don't want to have to rely on that, if you know what I mean. You want to do a better job of protecting the Moody Center, which you didn't do such a good job of, earlier on in conference play, which got you into kind of this hole that you've had to dig out of, right? I mean, you mentioned the back-to-back losses to West Virginia and UCF, that home loss at UCF when you were up double digits at halftime just couldn't happen. And it happened. And then you had the whole horns down fiasco, which we won't go down that rabbit hole maybe another day. But I actually think that horns down thing has kind of been a rallying cry for this team. So, I mean, I think an important part of the next 9 games for Texas to finish to the regular season needs to be winning and playing your best basketball at home. You have the road wins. Like if Texas goes into that, if they go into Selection Sunday or if they go into the Big 12 tournament with a resume that includes a win at Oklahoma, at TCU, at Cincinnati, and maybe one more, say you beat Tech on the road, which is their other remaining Big 12, road game, or you can just complement the road wins you already have with like a win tomorrow against the top 15 Iowa State team. Maybe, a win at home again against Oklahoma, another win at home against K-State. I mean, if you can just win your home games, defend home court, that puts you at 20 wins. And a 20-win team in the Big 12 ain't missing the tournament. They're just not. Unless they have too many bad losses, which Texas really doesn't have. The only real bad loss they have, in my opinion, was the road loss to West Virginia, who's just not a very good team this year. The UCF loss was bad, but UCF is actually, I think, a respectable,
solid team. Yeah,
solid team. The UCF loss was just bad because of the circumstance and what happened in that game. And it felt worse coming off of the loss to West Virginia because it put them at 1-3 in conference play. But then to bounce back with a home win against Baylor, even though that was hard fought, they got that done thanks to Max Abmas. I mean, where would this team? That's the next thing we can go into is where would this team be without Max Abmas? And then to beat Oklahoma soundly on the road when they were ranked well within the top 25 and then to fight back from a disappointing game at BYU and a game you could have won at home against Houston, to bounce back from that with a double-digit victory on the road against TCU, who's in the top half of the Big 12 and is going to be in the tournament. It's I think it shows the resiliency in this team. And we saw it last year when Terry took over. I mean, that team was resilient. The thing about that team, though, was they had fourth and fifth year starter after fourth and fifth year starter. They had experienced winners. And, you get Kendall Weaver, you get Onyema, you get some of these guys coming from smaller programs. It can be a little tougher, and it takes more time to adjust to this level of play. And look, I mean, Terry's seat has been kind of hot amongst Texas fans earlier in the season with some of the comments that he made about horns down originally and, losing some of these games that they shouldn't have. But he's actually done a really good job to have this team sitting at 4-5 in conference play, 15-7, and solidly right now in the tournament field.
Yeah, I mean, we can't forget the talk before the season. Like, this is, like, as much as we talked about it in the football season, that the fact that it's a farewell FU tour, but it also applies to basketball as well. And like, these guys in the locker room and these guys that they're playing in the Big 12, they've got something to prove whenever Texas is across from them. There's no question about that. And I think when you got a target on your back, I think maybe coming out in conference play, some of these newcomer teams wanting to get a piece of Texas. I think that's kind of that kind of was a wake up call a little bit.
Yeah, if you look at Texas's metrics now, they're 23rd in offensive efficiency. They're a good offensive team for the most part. There are some inconsistencies, but when compared to the rest of their peers in the country, aside from like that top group, the elite of the elite, who I consider to be like Purdue and UConn, and even at this point, I think North Carolina is in that tier. Kansas is playing on the road at K-State right now, but they throttled Houston this weekend. I don't think it says as much about Houston as it does about Kansas with the emergence of Johnny Furphy, the Australian who's emerged, the 6'9" Australian who can give them some extra scoring. Now they have 5 guys that can score instead of 4, and that makes a huge difference. But aside from that elite tier, going back to my original point, like top 25 in offensive efficiency, you're doing something right. And it's a big credit to, I think, Max Abmas. It's a big credit to, I think, some of the adjustments that Rodney Terry has made after non-conference play. He took Brock Cunningham out of the starting lineup and put back in IT Horton, and he's kind of played around with IT Horton and Kendall Weaver, mixed them in depending on the game in that starting lineup. Kendall Weaver, man, like there's Max Abmas and there's Dylan DeSue, and then there's that next tier of guys who have really helped contribute to where Texas is now, and Kendall Weaver's like right there. He's been, as you mentioned, he's been an Energizer Bunny on defense. He's all over the place, gets his hands in passing lanes, plays solid defense. He doesn't foul all that often for kind of an more undersized guard who's playing against a lot of these bigger guards in the Big 12. He's actually been pretty good playing defense without fouling. And for a small guard like him or a smaller guard like him, he does a fantastic job rebounding. And when he can't get the rebound, he's there to tip it out. And that's been huge for Texas because at times when this Texas team has struggled, they've struggled on the glass. They were like a couple weeks ago, they were ranked 13th out of 14 Big 12 teams in rebounding, which wasn't going to cut it. That number has risen due to guys like Kendall Weaver and the hustle plays that he makes. And he's also really, really good moving without the ball. He's not a great shooter yet, but he's a really young player. He's going to be around for another couple years. He can develop into that, I think. But moving without the ball and finishing around the rim, that's all you really need. 10 points from that guy a night, 10 to 12 points from that guy a night, that's huge. Especially when, because it can kind of supplement, when Tyrese Hunter is struggling. He's been kind of inconsistent lately, but when he's on, he's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's still one of my worries, though, with this Texas team is they still need more out of Tyrese Hunter. I know he does so much on the defensive end of the floor, and he's playing hard, but we can't have the inconsistency in the tournament. Down the stretch in these Big 12 games from Tyrese Hunter, scoring 21 night and then 4 points the next. Like, it's just not going to work that way, I don't think. I think they need more from Tyrese Hunter. But other than that, I think they're playing a really underrated brand of basketball due to some of the things I mentioned. Max Abmas. Some have gone as far to say that Max Abmas is the best late game shot creator that Texas has seen since Kevin Durant. You can't really argue with it. He's 13th all time in scoring in college basketball, and he's done this over and over and over again. Nobody's saying he's Kevin Durant, but with what he can do to get his own shot, playing against some of these bigger guards to create his own shot and to hit these big shots over and over and over again, it's put this Texas team where it is right now. You think about the shot against Louisville early on in the season to win that game. You think about the shot on the road in Cincinnati to win that game, just getting to his spot, knocking it down. Hit some big shots in that Baylor game, but also, down the stretch in the TCU game. He's been Mr. Clutch for this Texas basketball team. Now, I'm not going to go as far as to say that he's the best since Kevin Durant, but certainly in that conversation. There's a reason the guy is 14th, or I think he's 14th, and he's going to pass Oscar Robertson like here in the next couple games with how much he's scoring. The guy's fantastic. He struggled early on in the season, but he's figured it out.
Yeah.
And if you watch the last 4 minutes of that TCU game, he took over. Like, that's what he did. And that's the reason Texas won by, I think he scored 13 points in the last 3.5 minutes. That's a closer, and that's important for this Texas team. I do worry, though, about Caden Shedrick. And the reason is because he's been banged up. And he does a lot of the dirty work, good rebounder, pretty good defender, but smart player, can score around the rim, but it just seems he's very, very fragile. His body just, I don't know. They need him, though.
Yeah.
He can't be. Yeah. So those are my thoughts. There's a lot going on here, but with all that being said, to be 23rd in offensive efficiency and now 59th in defensive efficiency, which isn't great. It's okay. But to come from where they were a couple weeks ago, which was in the hundreds in defensive efficiency, it's pretty good. So they're continuing to play better. Even in that Houston game, they played a good game. They just made a couple mistakes late.
Yeah. On the margins.
The only game I don't think they played very well defensively here in the past 5 or so games was the BYU game, where they gave up 84 and BYU was just getting into the paint at will. I think BYU up until the last 5 minutes of that game was shooting above 70% from the field, which is just ridiculous. But those are my thoughts. Do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Well, I was gonna say something about Caden Cedric, but you pretty much hit everything I wanted to cover with that. Um, I guess just one last thing on Caden Cedric is the fact that when he's not in the lineup, I just think the aggregate size just as a unit just goes down a huge notch. Because then you end up having, Dylan Mitchell as a low man in a lot of lineups guarding the weak side corner. And he can do that, but that's not really his best trait. And that's putting guys and you end up putting guys in situations where they're not as optimized. So hopefully he'll be back and ready to go by the time conference tournament comes around. But because that's when we'll need him most. But until then, uh, just got to kind of hang in there.
And that's the last guy that I totally left out. Dylan Mitchell, man.
Yeah.
He still hasn't become the scorer that we hoped he would become. And I think he can still develop into that. But what he does do is everything else. He rebounds. He chases on the defensive glass. He handles the ball. He attacks the rim. He scores at the rim. He's super athletic. He defends. Like, I think it's 8 or 9 double-doubles now for Dylan Mitchell this season. He's averaging, I got to look up his numbers, but I think he's averaging near a double-double. Fantastic. Give me that every night.
Yeah.
And that will work for me. He's been good. He was part of the reason they were in the Houston game.
Yeah.
Part of the reason that Houston game didn't get away from Texas early was because of Dylan Mitchell. So keep giving me that, Dylan Mitchell. If we can get that on a fairly consistent basis, we can get Max Asmus and what he does. I mean, he's going to be an all conference guard at this point. We get the Sioux playing at a pretty high level, and then we just get chips from Kendall Weaver here and Caden Shedrick there, and maybe Brock Cunningham has he hasn't been as good from three this year, not nearly as good, but he has knocked down some shots. He's starting to look better. If you might get a 3 for 4 night from Brock Cunningham from 3 one night, and that's just a bonus. You never know. So
3 for 4 for all the years that he's been alive. 34.
Yeah. Another thing about this Texas team, though, is they're right now sitting at 37.7% from three this year. That's top 25 in the country. They're a pretty good 3-point shooting team. Yeah. And they're also pretty efficient on the offensive end. They are 54.6% effective field goal percentage, which is 35th in the country. So a lot of their metrics are improving. Right now they sit 26 in KenPom, and that will move up if they beat Iowa State tomorrow. And I believe they moved up in the net too. I don't know exactly what they are in the net, but they're moving up rapidly in the net rankings as well. So yeah, I mean, can't really complain about where Texas basketball is at right now. Credit to Rodney Terry and the staff for navigating this stretch of 6 consecutive ranked opponents. It's not easy, but to be at 3-2 with an opportunity to go to 4-2 tomorrow against Iowa State, all I could ask for.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Right at the 30-minute mark. Thank you guys for tuning in. Let's move along here on a Monday night of Super Bowl week. One of my favorite weeks of the year. Okay. Let's talk about this Texas football signing class of 2024. And we're just going to be talking about, I thought about including the transfers at each position that we're going to grade, but I decided to keep them separate. We'll do that, I think, closer to when the spring window opens and Texas really can polish off its transfer portal class. But We're just going to start on offense. We're going to grade 8 positions. We're going to go quarterback, running back, wide receiver, offensive line. Then we'll switch to the defense and we'll go interior defensive line, edge, linebacker. They only got one commit at linebacker. It's Ty Anthony Smith. And then secondary. So I'll start us off. Okay. Let's start with the quarterback position. And so Texas in the 2024 class at the quarterback position signed Trey Owens, a quarterback out of Cypress Fair High School in Cypress, Texas, just outside of Houston, by the way. It's like 30 minutes from where I'm sitting right now. He's a 4-star prospect according to Rivals. He was an early commit. He actually committed way back in January of last year. So he was solid to Texas through the spring, through the summer. And he was Sark's quarterback for this class. I think he's a Texas kid through and through. And landing a prospect like this, I think, is a win for this Texas staff. It's a win for A.J. Milwheat, and it's a win for Sark. Because if you look at the circumstances surrounding 2024 quarterback recruiting for Texas, you have Quinn Ewers coming back. He's a starter next year, right? Then, presumably, you have Arch Manning, who will start the next 2 years after that, right? I mean, the Manning family has been pretty consistent about letting this product bake in the oven. You know, instead of baking it 15 minutes at 375 degrees, the Manning family might go more so 20 or 25 minutes. They're going to let Arch bake in the oven until he's really ready to go to the NFL. I don't think he's a guy who's just going to play 1 year and then leave for the league. But it's kind of a transitional year in that sense because Texas didn't really have to take a quarterback if they didn't want to in this class, but they thought highly enough of Trey Owens to take a guy. And he can serve as like that kind of transitional guy and a depth piece on this roster if someone were to get hurt. You know, if Quinn were to get hurt, which we hope doesn't happen, Trey Owens would be the guy behind Arch Manning. I like him as a prospect. I've watched some of his film. He's risen in the rankings. He's 6'5", good size, really strong arm. He's a good prospect. Like, he's not, no offense to Charles Wright, he's not Charles Wright. He's a little bit better and a little bit of a higher profile prospect than Charles Wright is. For the situation that this Texas staff was put in with the unique circumstances that nobody else in the country is having to deal with right now with a guy named Manning in their quarterback room, I don't think people really comprehend how much weight that holds at this point. It's a big get for Texas. And there's no guarantee that they're going to be able to hold on to KJ Lacey in the 25 class, who we talked about a couple episodes ago. So I'm giving this a B+. I think it's a really solid get. Can't give it an A because he's not the upper echelon of quarterback in this 2024 class, but that's not what really Texas needed. He's a really solid get. And he just continues to stack at the quarterback position.
Yeah, I mean, you got to continue to bring in quarterbacks. You can't be shy about no matter like who you have on your roster. Like, nothing is guaranteed in college football nowadays. It really never has. But nowadays, in particular, something could happen, and then all of a sudden you have people in the portal flying all over the place, and you need Plan B and Plan C in the building just in case. And in this case, I mean, 4-star guy, I mean, from Texas, is going to already know a lot of the players that are already on the team, like from being in Texas and from, just being around. in football circles in the state of Texas. So I think that's a plus. And then he's going to be able to develop under Sark, which is at the very least, I think could be 2 or 3. I mean, 2 or 3 years, definitely 2 years at least. So I'm giving it like right at a B plus, same as you.
Yeah, it's a solid get. Nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah.
For the circumstances of Texas. Trey Owen this year at Sci-Fair, 3,400 yards, 43 touchdowns. And he was the 2023 of the year in his district. So he's a good player. Go watch his film. All right, let's move to running back. For me, at the running back position, you can make an argument that Tashard Choice, aside from maybe Jeff Banks and Sark, is the best recruiter, the best position coach recruiter on this staff. And he has been ever since he got to Texas. And Sark brought him over. I think eventually, and we'll get to the players here in a second. I think eventually, and I hate to say this because I don't want to lose to Tashard Choice, but I think eventually, if he continues doing what he's doing, just year after year, putting running backs into the NFL, seeing what he did with Jonathan Brooks, what he did with Roshan and Bijan, obviously, he's developing a track record, and he's continuing to recruit at a very, very high level. Texas already landed like a probable 5-star for the 26 class at the running back position. And they're going to probably add a 5-star in the 25 class at the running back position. So Tashard Choice as a recruiter and just as a coach of football, I think eventually, if it's not a head coaching job, he's going to get like an offensive coordinator position somewhere and then likely end up as a head coach somewhere just based on what he's done at Texas and his spots before. He was at Georgia Tech back when Jahmyr Gibbs was there, and Jahmyr Gibbs was developed into a top 6 pick in the NFL draft. I mean, come on.
Yeah, top 12. Yeah,
top 12.
And the Lions would have taken him at 6 as well.
Yeah, I mean, you get the point.
Yeah, yeah.
But this year, to get Jarrett Gibson, who was a super blue chip guy out of the IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida, high 4-star guy, very solid prospect, and to land Christian Clark out of Phoenix, Arizona, another 4-star back, very underrated in my opinion. And to be able to fend off those other in-state schools that were pursuing those guys and to just pluck Jarrett Gibson from the state of Florida, where you have Florida State and Florida, all those programs in the state of Florida wanted Jarrett Gibson very, very badly. And to fend off Arizona and Arizona State and those programs on the West Coast for a very underrated back like Christian Clark, it's an A for me. It's an A haul. 2 very, very solid running backs. And I think you have to give benefit of the doubt to Tashard Choice at this point. He knows how to evaluate the high school ranks. He's done it for years. And even if you don't really know from a national standpoint who Christian Clark is, I mean, go watch his film. He looks a lot like a guy named Bijan Robinson. Just say that. And Sark said that as well. But I think at this point, I'm giving Tashard Choice the benefit of the doubt. 2 really solid backs. 2, I think, the best backs in the country when it's all said and done. It's a Longhorn running back machine for years to come as long as Tashard Choice is here. This is the A haul for me.
Yeah, I got to give this an A plus. I mean, this is, I think the pairing of these 2 backs, it's what you want, 2 guys to come in, push each other, and then eventually be featured next to each other. I think in all of football, really, NFL, college, whatever. I think a duo of running backs is what's most effective. And I think this group, we're going to see it from them, maybe even in year one. This is going to be, I think, instant impact when they're on the field.
You could definitely see an impact in year one. Now, it's going to be CJ Baxter
Yeah.
and Jaden Blue as long as they're healthy for the most part. But I don't want to speak anything into existence, but Baxter's a guy who I think, he was banged up a lot last year. It's not to say he's going to be next year, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind. And so to have that depth at running back is no doubt only a benefit to Sark and this Texas team. And so another two really highly rated guys added to that running back room. Credit to Shard Choice. He's doing a fantastic job. And anything Texas can do to give him a raise to try to keep him at Texas would be awesome.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Wide receiver. I think it's A minus for me. A minus A. I mean, it borders, I think. Obviously, we know what Texas did at the receiver position in the transfer portal. But the reason it's an A is because of Ryan Wingo. You go out and you add a 5-star prospect from out of state, the state of Missouri, a guy like Ryan Wingo who has the unique combination of size and speed and athleticism, played at a really high level, was one of the best players in the state of Missouri, if not the best player in the state of Missouri. Just dominant and is already impressing in winter workouts, according to people close to the situation. It's huge. You also get, I think, a really nice prospect in Parker Livingstone out of Lucas Lovejoy High School. He's a bigger body, 50-50 balls, stretch the field, really good at the catch point. I really like him as a prospect. I think he's a guy who could contribute fairly early on. I think, Freddie DuBose is probably going to be a redshirt guy, but he's got all the talent in the world. He was actually rated a little bit higher as a prospect before he got hurt, which is unfortunate. And he's still kind of coming off that injury. He's a really solid player. Speed kind of fits into the identity of this Texas team and what they want to do offensively. But I don't think he'll be a guy who contributes right away like maybe a Ryan Wingo will be. So he's good to have. Like, it's a bonus to have him, but you probably won't see him next year. And then late in the process, to get Aaron Butler, who decommits from Colorado, after Texas lost Aaron Hampton, he flipped to Alabama on signing day, right before Saban's retirement. I mean, get that. You flip to Alabama thinking Saban's going to be there, and then Saban retires. It's kind of funny how that worked out. But to get Aaron Butler, who is drawing comparisons to Xavier Worthy from a high school standpoint. Really quick, speedy, athletic. Go watch his tape. It's fun to watch. He could even be a guy who maybe finds his way onto the field earlier than you expect him to, if he really impresses in spring ball. I think it's A minus. The reason I'm not giving it a solid A is because I still think Texas should have done better recruiting in state. They didn't really sign an elite wide receiver from the state of Texas, and they had the opportunity to do so. They lose Micah Hudson, who is one of the best receivers in the country, to Texas Tech. And while that's not such a huge deal because he's a Texas Tech legacy and he had, connections to Texas Tech, his dad played at Texas Tech, Texas kind of fumbled that recruitment. Hudson didn't really, for whatever reason, he was one of the rare guys who just wasn't able to develop, for whatever reason, a very good relationship with Steve Sarkisian and the Texas staff. I think Texas can do a better job and will do a better job in the 2025. That's just littered with elite receivers in state. But I think if they would have gotten Micah Hudson and Ryan Wingo, then we'd be talking home run out of the ballpark, A plus.
Yeah.
But that's just my perspective. If you wanted to give this an A, I wouldn't argue with you.
Yeah, for me personally, I did give it an A. But I definitely see your point of view on it. You definitely want to be winning those recruiting battles in the state of Texas, um, especially now that we're going into the SEC. Those recruiting battles are just going to be so essential because those recruiting battles are going to be against teams that you're playing in conference from now on. So I think big picture, though, I think Ryan Wingo, the comparisons to AJ Brown, the comparisons to just a guy who's a heavy set receiver, the run after the catch ability, the dominance at the catch point. It jumps off the screen, man. I mean, I just can't wait to see how Sark is able to get him in space, and then I think with his frame and he doesn't have to bulk up. He already has the frame to be in college and be ready to go. So I think he's going to be a guy who can break tackles and take a 2-yard catch to the house at any given moment.
Yeah, if it's solely based off potential, it's definitely, I mean, for the sole fact they got Ryan Wingo from the state of Missouri as a 5-star rated prospect, a guy who recruiting experts project to be an eventual first round pick. And if he develops into kind of that AJ Brown, DK Metcalf kind of mold, this will be of course, I mean, it would be beyond a home run. But I mean, it's an A. It's an A minus. It's an A, whatever you want to give it, depending on how you see it. And so far, I mean, this is kind of the trend with when you sign back to back top 5 recruiting classes. At least from my standpoint, and Emmy's on a very similar wavelength here. I've given the first 3 positions a B plus, an A, and an A minus. Like very, very, very good. And you could argue for higher if you wanted to. Okay, offensive line. It's an A minus at the very least because you get a guy like Brandon Baker, one of the best offensive tackles in the country, from the state of California, Mater Dei High School, which is one of the better high school programs in America. You get him. He's one of those guys who I think from an offensive line standpoint is like first guy off the bus kind of guy. Like he looks really, really good. He carries his weight very, very well. He's just a built, very good looking prospect. And he's going to put on more weight, in this strength and conditioning program. I've already heard that he looks awesome in winter workouts. Now it's just winter workouts. It's, sprints, lifting weights, doing some drills. But I mean, seriously, he looks fantastic. And he's one of the better offensive tackle prospects in the country. And these are the kinds of guys that Kyle Flood has been landing the past couple of years. I think he could very easily develop into Kelvin Banks kind of impact guy very, very soon at the right tackle position. And I think eventually, once Kelvin Banks, of course, goes to the draft, most likely next year, Texas will cross-train Brandon Baker at left tackle so that when Kelvin Banks leaves, they can move Brandon Baker over to left tackle and still keep Cam Williams at right tackle. I think you'll see probably Cam Williams start, and rightfully so, makes these guys earn it. Cam Williams is a highly rated guy himself out of Duncanville who's been in the program already a couple of years, and he's earned his position there, taking over for Christian Jones. But very easily, you could see Brandon Baker challenge for that job at right tackle early on. And the reason this is a solid A for me, actually, is because of what they got in Daniel Cruz. He's a guy who's, I think, one of the more underrated interior offensive line prospects in the country. I think he projects as a center at Texas, but they could very easily play him at either guard position. Like, he has that versatility, and he's just a mauler in the run game. He's obviously needs to develop a little bit from a bodily standpoint, but with him and Nate Kibble, who's another underrated guard kind of guy, long arms, athletic, it's another really strong class, full of big, physical SEC kind of bodies that Texas continues to stack in that offensive line room. And Kyle Flood, much like Tashard Choice from a positional coach standpoint, with what he's done since he got to Texas with the offensive line, deserves a little bit of a benefit of the doubt at this point.
Yeah, definitely. I think I give this a minus. I think the same grade you gave it. I think, but regardless, man, I think Brandon Baker, as you said, I mean, it's not quite to the level of, say, Ryan Wingo, like to the what the wide receiver room is, but 4-star guy, and from that premier of a program where they got eyes all around the country, and you're plucking him all the way from California. That's a big deal. Getting those roots out in California, winning these recruiting battles all over the country. It's been really impressive to see from this staff.
Yeah, absolutely. They also landed a tight end in Jordan Washington. We'll talk about more about him later on. He's a solid guy, underrated, I think, but we're not going to dive into the tight end position right now, just to condense it and save time. All right, let's move to the defensive side of the ball. Let's start with the interior defensive line. So it's a little bit of an interesting situation for one reason, and that's Texas lost Bo Davis. He went to LSU, his alma mater. Unfortunately, he's a great coach, did a great job developing what Texas already had on campus. One of the criticisms, though, of Bo Davis is he wasn't recruiting at an elite level. He was recruiting good players, no doubt, but he wasn't getting, the elite defensive lineman. He wasn't getting the Walter Nolans of the world.
Yeah.
Wasn't getting that ilk of prospect. And it's something that's kind of been one of the criticisms of this Texas staff as a whole. They just haven't signed the elite interior defensive line prospect yet. They bring in Kenny Baker, who coached, at the group of 5 level for a number of years at the defensive line coach position, and was actually last year an assistant defensive line coach under the Miami Dolphins and Vic Fangio. So he comes from that kind of coaching tree. People say it got criticism early on because it wasn't what Texas fans thought it was going to be. I mean, after losing a guy, the ilk of Bo Davis, I think Texas fans kind of expected Sark to go out and get another Bo Davis, another guy of that caliber, highly respected either in the college ranks or the NFL. To go get the assistant defensive line coach from the Miami Dolphins, I don't think was something that a lot of Texas fans were expecting. And nobody really knew outside of the Miami Dolphins and whoever, at Baker's previous stops who Kenny Baker was. But from what I know, people say he's a fantastic developer of talent. He's a very good pass rush coach, which is interesting to hear. This is just what industry sources say. And I think the big question still remains. The problem with the hire, I think, is the question still remains, will Kenny Baker be able to go out and land those guys? Texas is going to need them eventually in the SEC. They just are. So the problem with this defensive line class is they did lose DeAndre Robinson, the 4-star defensive lineman from the state of Florida, due to Bo Davis leaving. And there's nothing you can really do about that, but it is kind of disappointing. And it leaves this defensive line signing class in a spot that, in my opinion, is just slightly underwhelming for what I think it should be. I love Alex January, the Duncanville product. He was on that defensive front with Colin Simmons, who we'll talk about shortly. Very, very solid defensive line prospect. Deserves every bit of his 4-star rating. I mean, he's really, really solid. And you could see him contribute, I think, sooner rather than later, as long as he keeps the bad weight off. And then Melvin Hills is a guy who I think will play some 3 technique early on. Fairly underrated, needs to fill out a little bit, but he's a good prospect. So they did get 2 guys, but it's just a little underwhelming. If they were able to keep DeAndre Robinson and maybe add a higher level guy like Dominic McKinley, this would be a B+, A-. But for me, it's solid. It's nothing special. It's okay. It's underwhelming for me in what I expect of this Texas staff moving forward. I think they will do better moving forward. And it's one of the questions of this program right now is the interior defensive line with Sweat and Murphy, of course, going to the NFL, and the change at defensive line coach. So for me, and it's not a knock on Alex January or Melvin Hills. It's just this is kind of underwhelming. So yeah. I give it a C+. Not terrible, but not. I mean, it's okay.
Yeah, I see it as kind of average. I gave it a B- for all the reasons you mentioned, but I think Alex January is a different type of defensive tackle than we've maybe seen, and maybe he can develop into something different. I think I see him more playing at the nose position and maybe not on 3 technique or anything like that, or what or Byron Murphy was doing. I think January is going to be, not to pigeonhole him or anything, but I think his best strength as a player in college is going to be run defense for sure.
Yeah. Okay. That's defensive line. And that, for me, just so you guys know, will probably be the lowest graded position group for sure. I think for both of us. Edge is an A+. And I don't care what anyone says. Colin Simmons is the reason why. He was the white whale, per se, of this Texas staff in this class, just like Arch Manning was the year before, and they got him. And there was really no fight put up from programs that were heavily recruiting him from early on in the recruiting process. Early on, before spring, he was an LSU lean. He's also heavily recruited, of course, by A&M, some other programs around, Alabama, of course. But Texas did a really good job with this recruitment. They played the long game, and they were able to land Colin Simmons, which is huge. He's, I think, the number 1 prospect overall in the state of Texas for the 2024 class. That's huge, of course, when you can get the elite of the elite in the state of Texas. He is I think Colin Simmons, barring some catastrophic injury or something stupid that he would do off the field, which I don't think he'd ever do because he's just a great kid. I think he's guaranteed to go to the NFL. And I don't say that pretty much ever about any prospect. I think he is. I'd go as far as to say he's a guaranteed first round pick.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, he's pretty damn close to it. If not, I mean, I see where you're coming from for sure. I don't know if I can really come out and say that. I think
He's already put on 15 pounds since he stepped on campus. He's up to
so.
240. He's up to
Ooh,
240.
okay. So Edge full time, I'm guessing.
Yeah. And to be clear, I don't think he's going to start right away. I think Trey Moore is going to start, the transfer from UTSA. And I think, Barron Sorrell will probably get the nod early on, but he will rotate. He'll rotate in, and that's part of what I think will make this Texas edge group one of the best parts of this defense, hopefully, because they're going to need it given that they lose what they lose in the interior. Now, if he's not, I think comparing him to the rest of the class, Colin Simmons is the most guaranteed to be like first round kind of talent. Because if you look at what the NFL is after right now, they're after quarterbacks and guys that get after quarterbacks. And I think Colin Simmons, from a positional value standpoint, I mean, he's a rarity. Like, these guys don't grow on trees, especially in the state of Texas every year. And then to get a guy like Zena Umeozulu to pair with him, a solid 4-star guy out of Allen, Texas, this edge group is really, really impressive. And you add Trey Moore into the fold along with Barron Sorrell coming back, and to beat out future SEC rival LSU for Colin Simmons, it's just huge. Like, I can't understate it enough. So I think out of everyone in this class, and I think Ryan Wingo's fairly close, but I think Colin Simmons, again, as long as he's able to stay healthy, he's the closest thing you can get to a guarantee first rounder, in my opinion, with the way that his body is already developing and just what he did at Duncanville at the highest level
Yeah.
of high school football.
I mean, the resume speaks for itself, for sure. I mean, 2 state titles in a row, I think it was, and then one, state tournament MVP or state championship game MVP this past year. I mean, he's dominant, dude. I mean, the speed, I think once you have the speed and the bend around the edge, you can work so many different moves and different technique off of that. The sky's the limit, dude. Like, it's going to be crazy.
And you look, another reason I say it is because you look at the history of guys of Colin Simmons' ilk, 5 stars coming out of the state of Texas, guys of his recruiting profile. Think about Myles Garrett. You think about Justin Matabike. Like, those guys all turned into NFL players. I think Colin Simmons, and don't mistake, I'm not saying Colin Simmons is going to be Myles Garrett. By no means am I saying that, but I think he's on a similar path to the NFL in that respect.
I
Because
agree.
the numbers bear it out. Okay. Linebacker, this can be pretty fast. For me, this is a B+, similar to kind of the way the quarterback position was. Texas took a big class last year at linebacker, the 2023 cycle, which was spearheaded by, of course, Anthony Hill. And a lot of those guys are still developing and will play larger roles this upcoming year. So Texas didn't really they didn't have a huge need to get a huge linebacker class this year. Before, going into November, they didn't even have a linebacker signed in this class, but they were able to flip Ty Anthony Smith, a 4-star linebacker, who flipped on National Signing Day. He flipped his pledge from an in-state rival, Texas A&M, which is always bittersweet when Texas is able to flip guys from A&M or Oklahoma, of course. He's a developmental guy. I don't think he's going to play right away, but I really like him as a prospect. I really like where this could go. Speedy linebacker, really solid in run fits. Again, needs to fill out some more, develop his body, but I think under new linebacker coach Johnny Nansen, I trust that the staff to do good work with Ty Anthony Smith, and it's just a solid B plus. I mean, it fills a need. You keep stacking solid talent in that room, and that's really all that needs to be said, I think.
Yeah, I think speed as a unit is always good to add, just in general. So, sideline to sideline player, the instincts are there. I've clicked on his huddle tape a little bit here before this show started. I think, yeah, as you said, I mean, he's got to fill out, but that's the case with 95% of linebackers that come into college. So I think he'll be on the development track, and I think by year 2 we'll start seeing the results come through.
I agree. Secondary. Look, we're not doing cornerback safety because I think a lot of the skill sets in this secondary class are very, very interchangeable. Like I think Jordan Johnson Rubel, who's a super blue chip prospect out of the ING Academy, teammate of Jarrett Gibson. Very versatile guy. He's a guy that could play nickel, he could play corner, or he could end up at safety. Like we just don't know. But that's just like I think in a nutshell shows you kind of the versatility with a lot of these guys in this class. To go out and do what they did at the defensive back position for kind of the second consecutive year, to get what I think is probably the best corner in the state of Texas and Kobe Black, as kind of the head of this defensive back class, to get Wardell Mack to flip him from Florida as another super blue chip caliber guy, long, lengthy, athletic corner type, really solid player. And to get Santana Wilson, who's another long, lengthy guy with NFL in his blood, with Adrian Wilson being his dad, a former All-Pro in the NFL, along with Xavier Filsaime, a 5-star safety added to this class, right behind Derek Williams, who's developed into a very solid young player for this Texas team. It can't get much better from a elite level of recruiting in the secondary. There's athleticism, there's versatility, there's length, a lot of skill. They all come from very, very highly touted high school programs, all played at a fairly high level. There's NFL bloodlines. It's one of the better secondary classes I think Texas has signed in the past decade, if not the best. And that's saying something because the last secondary class, 2023, was very good as well. I mean, Malik Muhammad and Derek Williams were 2 5-star-ish, borderline 5-star guys in that class, depending on who you talk to. So this is what you want to see. Stack that super blue chip talent in every room. And Texas is doing a great job of that. This, along with the edge position, to me, are A pluses.
Yeah, I think it's an A plus as well. I mean, you mentioned Santana Wilson and the fact that he's son of Adrian Wilson. I mean, we've seen it so many times. Guys that are sons of, I think, defensive backs in certain case is like the one that I see the most of, in my opinion, is sons of guys in the NFL. They learn the technique. They have, just they think the game at a higher level. And man, whenever you can get that guy in the building, it's just such a huge advantage. You see Asante Samuel in the league now, on Antoine Winfield Jr. I mean, it's all over the place. Guys that are sons of NFL players.
Yeah, I agree. Um, Overall, this recruiting class, man, uh, very, very solid, of course. By most accounts, they're a top 6 class in the country. I think On3 has them rated the lowest at number 6, but everybody else has them in their top 5. Uh, Very, very solid class. Another top 5 caliber class from this coaching staff. They did a very good job. Again, this Texas staff is going to play its game. And at this point, you kind of have to give them the benefit of the doubt. They're going to play the long game. They're not going to panic if a couple of their targets commit elsewhere early on in the process. They've been able to flip some of those elite guys from other programs. And I think at this point, coming off a college football playoff appearance, with the momentum that, I mean, we've talked about it over and over, that this Texas football program has built. If Texas can continue winning at this high level and making the college football playoff in the expanded playoff era, Texas eventually is going to recruit itself. It may be already doing so. Now, we'll talk about in a future episode here sometime soon how I think Texas needs to maybe improve a little bit in state. Not to say that they're doing bad in state. They're doing good, really good. But I think they could get better. This year, according to Rivals, and will be one of my last remarks, they signed 3 of the top 25 rated prospects in the Rivals database in the state of Texas. 3 of the top 25. And 2 of those guys were in the top 5, Kobe Black and Colin Simmons. And then you get, of course, Xavier Filsaime later on in the process. But if Texas could go from signing, say, 3 of the top 25 to 5 or 6 of the top 25, that's how you really elevate from like great in recruiting to elite of the elite.
Yeah.
If Texas had signed, say, 5 or 6 of the top 25 this past year in the state of Texas, they would have finished with the number 1 recruiting class. It just speaks to the high level of talent in the state. So, again, that's not to be taken as, for those of you guys out there, who might be, I'm just saying it's great right now. It could still get better. That's all I'm saying in the state of Texas. And I think it will get.
I'll even add on to that and say, like, if I'm Texas, I'm looking at some of these schools in Austin as well. I don't think Texas has really attacked those schools.
Absolutely. And I think, they're continuing to plant flags where they will. I think they've done a really good job developing the pipeline in the Dallas Metroplex area. They're starting to really go after some kids in Houston, especially in this 25 class.
Yeah.
They've already planted a flag out in Florida, which is one of the more fertile states in recruiting, just level of talent. They planted a flag in Louisiana, which isn't easy to do, especially when LSU is right there.
LSU and Alabama.
Going to get Arch Manning and Derek Williams in the 23 class. It speaks for itself. They've kind of built pipelines out in the state of California as well, getting guys like Brandon Baker. It's really impressive what they're doing in recruiting. So we'll talk about some of the in-state stuff. We'll continue now. We'll still talk about like the prospects in this 24 class, of course, moving forward when we get closer to spring ball, when we see what they're doing in spring ball, and when we dive deeper into the 2024 roster. But now our focus in our recruiting conversations, now that we put a nice bow tie on 2024 finally, will shift completely to 2025. So, Emmy,
right?
Don't forget about 2024. I know it's a lot, but Now you can shift your focus to just, okay, I have 5 minutes. Let me go watch one of the better players in the state of Texas and see or let me go read about whatever. So that'll be our recruiting stuff from here on out. Now, February is kind of a dead period. So in January, you had a lot of guys take official visits in the 25 class. Texas had a junior day where they hosted like over 100 official visitors a couple Saturdays ago. February is a dead period in recruiting, and there are a couple of dead periods in recruiting. It just means no visits can happen. Guys can commit if they want to, but no visits can happen. And so if once it really opens back up in March, we'll start to dive back into the 25 guys. Because we talked a little bit about the in-state guys, some of the in-state guys Texas is after, but there's a lot of out-of-state guys as well that we're going to have to talk about at some point. So just keep that in the back of your mind. I think this segment went really well. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think we'll definitely be doing something like this maybe in the future. I think in terms of draft stuff, I think the position by position angle might be one we could take in the future. I think that's actually, I think we could even like rank, I guess, depth by position in the draft. I don't know. We'll think of something, but
We're going to
I thought this worked out really well regardless.
We're going to do something draft related in our next dit hole. Now, we're also going to have to do something probably Texas baseball or college basketball related just because we need to. But
Yeah.
And I don't want to lose our momentum that we've already kind of built up with Texas baseball. Considering that starts in 10 days, like we'll talk about that. But there will be a draft segment. I don't know if it'll be like reacting to a mock that's been put out there on the web, maybe, or if we'll be doing something like Emmy said, something with positions and rankings and whatever. It'll be something along those lines. So just keep an eye out for that. And then episode 50 is going to be a special episode. Not going to reveal what that's going to be quite yet, but it'll be some kind of draft. Let's just say that. All right. Is that all? Any parting shots?
Not really, man. I will say, back to what I mentioned at the beginning of the show with the F1 stuff.
Oh my
I was
God.
shook. I was completely shook. So Lewis signed a 2-year extension last year, and then it had an out that we didn't know about. It had an out clause, and he was like, "Screw it, I'm dipping." And apparently Ferrari offered him the whole world and plus some. So I can't really blame him, but man, that really,
You know what?
yeah.
Next week, we will do a Patreon episode where we talk about F1. I made you do some recruiting stuff, so I'm gonna do some F1 stuff next week, sometime next week. If
Yeah,
not next,
dude,
if
every year I go into the F1 season feeling really hopeful. But this year I'm like, Red Bull's probably just gonna run with it again. Like, like
well, we'll talk some F1, and we might throw in like a gut check into
yeah,
that
let me throw
Patreon
in
episode.
something else.
So keep an eye out for that. But as far as this week is concerned, you'll get a Super Bowl episode, a loaded Super Bowl episode on Wednesday, and then probably later this week or this weekend you'll get. We might have to, depending on what happens, we might just have to do an NBA episode where we recap the trade deadline, which is on Thursday. But you'll see what happens. Regardless, there will be something.
Yeah, for the Super Bowl episode, I would even I think we talk about the Super Bowl, we break it down, and then we could even for the last 20 minutes or so have a conversation about the Pro Bowl and what can be done with that. Because I think that's a pretty interesting conversation.
Mm-hmm. Also, last note, coming on this podcast, Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports, there's a lot going on right now with the NCAA and college football in particular. NIL, transfer portal, all that stuff. We'll be talking about that stuff sooner rather than later. There's a lot to discuss there. So just throw that out there. All right.
Definitely.
We're out of here. For Emmy Nixon, for myself, Michael Wein, thank you guys for tuning in. Leave a like and subscribe. Hit the notifications bell if it's there, so you know when we go live. Make sure you're on our social media channels as well. Twitter. I believe we're still on Twitch. And
Yeah,
then
we're still streaming on Twitch.
every once in a while, we'll have some TikTok content for y'all as much as we can. And go look at our Patreon. Everything's free over there, and there will be more stuff coming. But until then, until Wednesday, we are gone. Hook 'em.
Peace out.